Commander Xaltor sat alone in his quarters, the soft hum of the alien base around him barely breaking the silence. He was a war hero, a leader feared across the galaxy, but today his face was a mask of weariness. The weight of countless battles, the lives he had led and lost, seemed to pull at him. His thoughts wandered back to a time, long ago, when his confidence had been shattered. A young alien soldier, eager and full of curiosity, stood in the doorway, looking up to him with respect. "Sir, is it true that humans changed everything? That they made even the strongest of us tremble?" Xaltor looked up, his expression hardening as memories from his past surged forward. He motioned for the soldier to sit down. "It's true," he said quietly, his voice steady but filled with an underlying sadness. "Humans, we never expected them to be what they were." The young soldier's eyes widened. "But you defeated so many powerful enemies, Commander. What made humans so different?" Xaltor's eyes flickered with the memory of that first mission on Earth. "Let me tell you how it all started." It was many years ago when Xaltor, at the height of his career, was assigned a mission to Earth. At that time, he had already defeated countless species, some far stronger and more technologically advanced than humans. He had crushed rebellions, quelled uprisings, and destroyed entire fleets. Nothing ever stood in his way. His reputation was unmatched. Humans, Xaltor had thought, would be just another easy conquest. His scouts had reported that Earth was a primitive world with a young, unrefined military force. They had weapons, but they were outdated, weak compared to the technology Xaltor commanded. The alien general was confident that Earth would fall within days of their arrival. As Xaltor's ship entered Earth's atmosphere, he looked down at the planet. It seemed so small, so fragile. Little did he know, the humans had something he couldn't predict, a brilliant strategy born from the very heart of their survival instinct. The first engagement took place near a small, unremarkable city. Xaltor's forces landed, expecting an easy sweep. The humans fought back at first, but their efforts were laughable. Their weapons didn't seem strong enough to even scratch the surface of Xaltor's advanced armor. But as the battle continued, something strange started happening. The humans weren't retreating as expected. They were disappearing. Xaltor's soldiers would take a few steps forward, only to be ambushed by human soldiers they had never seen. Small groups of humans seemed to appear from nowhere, using the terrain and their environment to hide. Traps were set up quickly and efficiently, ensnaring the alien invaders. Xaltor's forces struggled. They could not understand what was happening. These humans, they were everywhere and nowhere all at once. A squad of Xaltor's best soldiers was caught in a hidden pitfall, their screams lost in the night. "What is this?" one of his lieutenants asked, panic in his voice. "They are playing with us." Xaltor narrowed his eyes, trying to make sense of the situation. The humans' attacks were clever, too clever. Their strategy wasn't to overwhelm them with brute force, but to chip away at their confidence, their very sanity. It wasn't just about war, it was psychological warfare. That night, as darkness fell, the humans launched a devastating raid. Xaltor's forces had been split up in their confusion, and the humans took advantage of that. Xaltor remembered the fear that crept through his veins as the humans appeared out of the shadows. They moved like ghosts, blending into the environment so perfectly that the aliens couldn't track them. In the distance, he heard the sound of an old truck engine. He turned to look, but it was too late. The humans had set up a decoy. They had learned to use the same technology they had scavenged from past wars against the invaders. Their tactics were primitive, but they were effective. One small group of humans had managed to destroy an entire alien artillery unit with nothing but a few explosives and clever positioning. Xaltor couldn't understand it. How were they doing this? They were only humans. He had seen much more powerful species crumble before him. Yet these humans were fighting with a cunning he had never seen before. They were unpredictable, relentless, and above all, They were unafraid. Zaltor's forces, once confident in their victory, were now in disarray. Their communications were jammed, their supply lines cut off, and morale was rapidly crumbling. They had underestimated humanity's resourcefulness. Zaltor had expected them to fight with fear, to give in quickly. But what he saw was something entirely different. That was the moment Zaltor realized the truth. Humans did not fear death. They feared losing. They feared being forgotten. And it was that fear, their relentless drive to survive, to push forward against all odds, that made them more dangerous than any enemy he had ever faced. The young soldier listening to Zaltor's story sat in stunned silence. Zaltor's voice softened, and for a brief moment, he seemed lost in his memories. That night, he said, we lost 200 of my best men to just 12 human soldiers. It was the first time I had felt fear. Real fear, and it changed everything. Zaltor looked out the window, his eyes distant. That's why I'm telling you this. Never underestimate them. Humans are capable of more than just surviving. They're capable of winning, even when it seems impossible. The soldier nodded slowly, his eyes wide with understanding. He had never seen his commander speak with such vulnerability before. As Zaltor sat back, he realized that the young soldier was now seeing the humans through his eyes, through the eyes of someone who had been humbled by them. The universe was vast, and there were many powerful species. But Zaltor had learned, in the hardest way possible, that none of them were as unpredictable as humanity. And that more than anything, made them terrifying. This is the beginning of Zaltor's journey into the deep, chilling truth of human warfare. Would his fellow commanders learn from his mistakes, or would they, too, fall to humanity's unbreakable spirit? Only time would tell, but Zaltor knew one thing for sure. Humans were not to be underestimated. Zaltor's mind raced as he relived the next part of the campaign on Earth. After that first disastrous encounter, the alien forces regrouped, bruised but not broken. They made the mistake of thinking that the humans would retreat, that the shock of their own failure would cause them to panic and withdraw. But the humans, instead of retreating, began to reorganize. And that's when the true terror of humanity became clear to Zaltor. The humans weren't just surviving. They were learning. Every time the alien forces struck, the humans adapted. It wasn't just their tactics. It was their ability to read a situation and turn it to their advantage. It was as if they could predict the moves of their enemies, not because they had advanced technology or superior intellect, but because of a brutal, unforgiving instinct for survival. One night, under the cover of darkness, Zaltor's forces set up a new plan. They knew that the humans were watching them, learning from their every move. They decided to use their own fear against them. A large battalion would attack the human base in the open, drawing the humans into a trap. The idea was simple: lure them into a false sense of security, and then crush them with overwhelming force. But when the battle began, something felt off. The humans didn't engage immediately. They stayed hidden, just out of sight, watching. Zaltor's forces moved forward, confident in their overwhelming numbers, certain the humans were hiding, waiting for the right moment to strike. And then the humans did attack, but not in the way Zaltor had expected. Instead of charging from the front, they came from the sides, from the rear, and from the shadows. The humans had laid out a network of camouflaged tunnels and hidden paths, using the very terrain to mask their movements. Zaltor's soldiers were ambushed on all sides. They had no time to react, no time to form a defense. It was as if the humans had been living in the landscape for decades, knowing every inch of it. Zaltor had to take a step back, reorganize his troops, but the humans weren't finished. They never allowed the aliens to catch their breath. They attacked in waves, small groups moving quickly, using hit-and-run tactics that wore down the alien soldiers, making them paranoid. Every time the aliens thought they had a moment to regroup, a new threat would emerge from a different direction. The alien commander's frustration grew. These humans weren't like the others he had faced. They didn't rely on overwhelming firepower or advanced technology. They fought with precision and cunning. Every move seemed calculated, every ambush a work of art. It wasn't just their strategy. It was their understanding of what the aliens were capable of, and how to exploit every weakness. Zaltor began to notice something else. The humans didn't fight for the same reasons as the other species he had encountered. They didn't fight for conquest, for glory, or even for survival alone. They fought because they believed. There was something deeply rooted in their psyche, something primal, that drove them to keep fighting, no matter how many times they were knocked down. It was almost as if they couldn't stand to lose, not because of pride, but because their very identity was tied to their struggle. The human soldiers didn't care about dying. They cared about winning. It was a concept that was alien to Zaltor. In his experience, every soldier had a breaking point, a limit. No one could fight forever, no matter how strong they were. But the humans seemed to defy that logic. The tipping point came when Zaltor decided to send in a battalion of heavy artillery, convinced that the humans could not possibly overcome such advanced technology. His forces set up the massive weapons, creating a perimeter around a human stronghold. This would be the end of it, he thought. The humans wouldn't be able to get close enough to attack. With this final show of force, the victory would be his. But when the attack began, Zaltor was horrified to see what the humans had done. They had created a series of decoys, small structures, and fake soldiers scattered throughout the area. The aliens opened fire, but every target turned out to be a trick. The humans had laid out an intricate web of misdirection, using their knowledge of the terrain and the limitations of alien weapons to confuse and delay the assault. And then, as Zaltor's forces got bogged down in confusion, the humans struck from unexpected angles. They had used the decoys to herd the aliens into a trap. A small human squad infiltrated the artillery positions and sabotaged the heavy weapons. With one successful attack, the alien artillery was reduced to rubble. Zaltor stood frozen, watching as his forces fell apart. The humans had not only outsmarted them, they had made a mockery of their superiority. It wasn't just about firepower anymore. The humans had turned the battlefield into a puzzle, and every piece they moved had been designed to break the alien forces, piece by piece. It was then that Zaltor realized the full extent of humanity's brilliance. They weren't just clever, they were unpredictable. The humans could think outside the box, adapt to any situation, and do it all with an almost reckless determination that made them seem unstoppable. They didn't play by the rules that other species followed. They made their own rules. As Zaltor watched his soldiers retreat, he couldn't help but wonder, how could any force, no matter how advanced, hope to defeat a species that could adapt to anything and fight with such relentless passion? He had underestimated the humans, and it had cost him dearly. He clenched his fists, already thinking ahead, planning the next move. The war was far from over, but the realization had already set in. Humans were not just another species. They were a force of nature, one that would shape the course of this war and possibly the entire galaxy. Zaltor had seen many battles, fought on countless planets, and led his forces through the most brutal of wars. But nothing had prepared him for the night humans unleashed their full fury. After the humiliation of the failed artillery strike and the ambush in the dense forests, Zaltor knew the war had taken a dangerous turn. His soldiers were rattled, their confidence shattered. The humans were no longer just a nuisance. They were a force to be reckoned with. That night, Zaltor called his generals together in a darkened war room. The flickering lights from their alien communication devices cast long shadows across the walls. The air was thick with tension, and Zaltor's gaze was colder than ever. His mind raced, but deep down, he could feel it. The shift. They were losing. It wasn't a matter of if, but when. He had to make a decision. "Tomorrow, we will attack in full force," Zaltor announced, his voice low and measured. "We'll hit them at dawn, when they least expect it. We have the advantage in numbers and firepower. The generals nodded, but there was doubt in their eyes. The humans had proven themselves unpredictable, capable of turning any advantage into a disadvantage. But there was no other choice. They had to crush the humans before they had a chance to regroup again. Zaltor's plan was simple: strike fast, strike hard. They would use their superior technology and their numbers to break through the human defenses. The alien general believed that if they could catch the humans off guard, they could win the battle outright and perhaps even break the morale of the remaining human forces. As dawn broke over the alien world, Zaltor led his forces toward the human stronghold. The battle began as expected, with overwhelming alien firepower pounding the defenses, sending dust and debris into the air. Zaltor's soldiers pushed forward, confident that the humans would be unable to withstand such an assault. But once again, the humans had outwitted them. Just as the aliens thought they were closing in, the ground beneath them shifted. Suddenly, the humans began to appear, not from the front, but from every possible angle. They had used the terrain, the very earth beneath them, to create a network of underground tunnels and hidden passages. Alien forces, unprepared for this new method of attack, found themselves surrounded. The humans didn't fight with brute force. They fought with precision and intelligence. Small groups of human soldiers moved silently through the underbrush, taking out alien scouts and cutting off supply lines. At the same time, other squads set up traps, using alien technology against the invaders. It was clear now that the humans weren't just defending their land. They were fighting to win. They understood their enemy, they understood the terrain, and most importantly, they understood their own limits. Zaltor watched as his soldiers scrambled, their confidence quickly turning into panic. The humans weren't fighting like traditional soldiers. They weren't simply trying to overpower their enemies. They were wearing them down, piece by piece, causing chaos and confusion in their ranks. Zaltor's frustration reached a boiling point. He ordered his forces to regroup, but the humans didn't give them the chance. With each passing minute, the human resistance grew bolder. They launched surprise attacks from the sky, using old, modified aircraft that had been scavenged from past wars. They unleashed waves of guerrilla tactics, attacking in small, highly organized units, forcing the aliens into a battle of attrition. There was no room for strategy in this chaos. The aliens had never faced such a war before. Their strength was in numbers and technology, not in this type of warfare, where speed, cunning, and unpredictability were the keys to success. Zaltor tried to make sense of the human strategy, but it eluded him. The more he studied their tactics, the more he realized that the humans were doing something he hadn't expected. They were winning without relying on strength. At the heart of it all was a human commander, a woman who Zaltor had heard whispers about, but never encountered. Her name was Captain Reyes. She was the mastermind behind the chaos. Every attack, every move, every diversion was planned with precision. She had turned the humans into a force that could outthink the aliens, outmaneuver them, and strike at their very core. Zaltor knew that capturing Reyes would be the key to ending the war, but he had underestimated her. One evening, as Zaltor's forces took cover in a damaged structure, he overheard a conversation between two of his lieutenants. They were discussing the humans' tactics. "They've learned to use their own weaknesses," one said. "They aren't as strong as us. They don't have the firepower, but they're relentless. They fight when they're outnumbered. They fight when they're starving. They fight even when they're dying. That's what makes them dangerous." Zaltor frowned, hearing the words he had feared. The humans didn't fight with anger or even for survival. They fought for something deeper, something more. He could feel the truth of it. The humans weren't trying to beat him. They were trying to break him. The next day, Zaltor ordered another attack, this time against the human stronghold where he suspected Captain Reyes was hiding. He was determined to capture her alive, to learn what made her tick, to understand how someone like her could control such a vast resistance. The alien general thought that if he could crack the human leader, the rest of the soldiers would fall apart. But as his forces advanced, he encountered something unexpected. A trap, bigger than any he had faced before. The humans had planted explosives throughout the area, and Zaltor's soldiers found themselves caught in a deadly web of mines and ambushes. The humans had anticipated every move he would make. As the battle raged, Zaltor's forces were once again thrown into disarray. His plan to capture Captain Rice turned into a desperate retreat. Amidst the chaos, Zaltor's eyes locked onto a human soldier, a young man with bloodied hands, but a look of grim determination. The soldier didn't look like someone who was fighting for victory. He wasn't even fighting for survival. He was fighting for something deeper. Zaltor realized, with a sickening clarity, that this fight wasn't about conquering a planet or defeating an enemy. It was about human willpower. The humans were willing to fight until there was nothing left, and they would do it without mercy, without fear, and without hesitation. That was the moment Zaltor understood the true meaning of humanity's brilliance. He had been wrong. This was no longer just a war for resources or power. The humans fought because it was in their nature. And until the aliens could truly understand that, victory would always be just beyond their grasp. The war had taken a turn Zaltor had never anticipated. He was accustomed to battles of attrition, to facing enemies who, while brave, were ultimately predictable. But the humans, the more he observed them, seemed to exist beyond the realm of the rational. They defied every expectation, every calculation. They had an uncanny ability to endure the impossible and always find a way to win, no matter how dire their circumstances. Zaltor had seen many warriors fall before him, alien species whose entire cultures were built on their ability to conquer, to dominate. He had never met an enemy like the humans, who refused to bend, to break, to surrender. It was as if they had a different kind of resilience, one that went beyond their bodies and minds and seeped into their very spirit. It was a force that made them unstoppable, no matter the odds. The most recent battle was still fresh in Zaltor's mind. His forces had been pinned down for hours by the human resistance, unable to move, unable to regroup. Despite having the technological advantage, despite the overwhelming number of soldiers at his command, Zaltor had found himself cornered in the heart of the battlefield. The humans had taken out all of his communication lines, and every route of retreat had been blocked. For the first time in his military career, Zaltor felt something that he had never experienced before. Fear. It wasn't fear of death. He had faced that many times before. It was the fear of something far more insidious. It was the fear of being outwitted, outsmarted, and outlasted by a species he had once believed to be insignificant. In that moment, as his forces scrambled to regain control, Zaltor realized the full scope of the challenge before him. At the heart of it all was Captain Rice. Her strategies were unorthodox, unpredictable, and utterly effective. She understood that warfare wasn't just about brute strength or superior technology. It was about knowing the enemy, understanding their weaknesses, and exploiting them in ways they never saw coming. Every move she made was calculated, every risk carefully measured. She was more than a commander. She was a master tactician, and Zaltor had underestimated her from the very beginning. Zaltor had always believed that superior firepower and numbers would be enough to crush the humans. But as the battle wore on, he began to understand that this was a mistake. The humans didn't just rely on their weapons or their technology. They relied on their adaptability, their ingenuity, and their unrelenting drive to win. They were unpredictable, and that made them dangerous. The alien general knew that if he didn't find a way to break their spirit, to shatter their morale, the war would be lost. He began to consider new tactics, strategies he had never employed before. But as he began to plan his next move, something began to nag at the back of his mind. What if the humans weren't just trying to win the war? What if they were trying to prove something more? What if this battle was not about resources or power or territory, but about something that Zaltor could not yet comprehend. As he pondered this, he recalled the words of one of his lieutenants during a rare moment of quiet. The lieutenant had said, "The humans fight because it's in their nature. They don't fight because they have to. They fight because they choose to. They fight because they believe in something greater than themselves." Zaltor hadn't understood the significance of those words at the time, but now, in the midst of a battle that seemed unwinnable, they haunted him. The humans were not fighting for the same reasons as other species. They didn't fight for power or for domination. They didn't fight for resources. They fought because they believed they had a right to exist. They fought because they believed they could change the future. That was something that Zaltor hadn't fully grasped until now. The humans weren't just defending their world. They were fighting for their identity, for their way of life. And that made them unstoppable. As long as they believed they could win, they would find a way. They would never give up. The more Zaltor thought about it, the more he realized that humanity's strength didn't lie in their weapons or their technology. It lay in their hearts and minds. It lay in their will to survive and to persevere. And it lay in their unshakable belief that they could achieve anything if they worked together. They didn't see defeat as an option. Every setback was just a stepping stone to a greater victory. Zaltor knew that he had to rethink his approach. The old methods, the overwhelming force, the brute strength, wouldn't work against the humans. They had already proven that. He had to adapt, to find a way to outthink them, to play their game on their terms. But as he considered this, a part of him couldn't help but wonder, was there any way to break the human spirit? Was there any way to crush their will to fight? He decided to focus on Captain Reyes. If he could capture her, he believed, the rest of the humans would lose their edge. She was the key to their success, the mastermind behind every tactical decision. If he could break her, the humans would fall apart. But as he prepared for another assault, a voice from the battlefield interrupted his thoughts. A report came in from one of his scouts. Humans were advancing again, using guerrilla tactics. They had regrouped faster than he could have anticipated, and they were pushing into the alien camp once more. Zaltor clenched his fists. The humans would not stop. They would never stop. It was as though their very existence was a challenge to the universe itself. And as much as it frustrated him, it was also something he couldn't help but admire. In the chaos that followed, as Zaltor's forces tried desperately to regroup and fend off the relentless human attacks, he caught a glimpse of what it meant to be human. There were no great speeches, no calls for glory. There were only soldiers, commanders, and ordinary people, all of them fighting as if the fate of the world depended on it. And maybe, Zaltor thought, it did. The battle was far from over, but the momentum was shifting. Zaltor could feel it in his bones. The tide was turning, and not in his favor. For the first time in a long while, he began to question the path he had chosen. How had the humans managed to resist so fiercely, even when they were outmatched? It wasn't just their tenacity that confounded him. It was their creativity. Zaltor had fought wars across countless planets, facing species of all kinds, some more technologically advanced, others with brute strength that matched his own. But none had ever fought the way the humans fought. They adapted to every situation, using the environment to their advantage, exploiting even the smallest weaknesses. In his many years of experience, Zaltor had never come across a foe who could outthink him as the humans did. He had underestimated them from the start, assuming that their primitive weaponry and limited resources would make them easy to conquer. But the humans had outlasted his initial push, and they had done it by outwitting him at every turn. The more Zaltor analyzed their strategies, the more he realized that their strength wasn't in the size of their armies or the power of their weapons. It was in their adaptability. They didn't rely on brute force. They relied on ingenuity, on making do with what they had, and on constantly changing tactics to keep their enemies guessing. Zaltor's forces had been caught off guard again and again, unable to counter the humans' guerrilla tactics. They fought like a swarm, never staying in one place for long, always shifting, always moving. and despite his superior technology, Zaltor found himself unable to predict where the next attack would come from. Every time he thought he had them cornered, they slipped away, regrouping in a new location and hitting him from an unexpected angle. The humans had an uncanny ability to be in the right place at the right time, using the terrain to their advantage, setting traps, and ambushing his soldiers with terrifying precision. And then there was Captain Reyes, the alien general that heard stories about her, of course. Whispers among his subordinates of a human commander who had earned a reputation for her brilliance on the battlefield. But until now, he had only seen her as a figure in the shadows, an enigma whose tactics defied explanation. Now, however, he was beginning to understand just how dangerous she truly was. Reyes was no mere soldier. She was a strategist, a visionary, someone who saw the bigger picture and knew exactly how to push her forces to the limits. Zaltor had spent much of his time trying to capture or eliminate her, but the more he studied her methods, the more he realized that the battle wasn't about defeating her, it was about defeating her ideas. If he could shatter the foundation of her strategies, perhaps he could break the human resolve as a whole. But there was one thing Zaltor didn't understand. What drove Captain Reyes? Why did she continue to fight so fiercely when it seemed impossible to win? What made her different from the other human commanders he had faced in the past? What was it about her that allowed her to inspire such loyalty in her soldiers? Zaltor spent days contemplating these questions, but the answers eluded him. He knew he had to confront Reyes directly, to break her spirit, to see if there was any weakness in her resolve. It was a dangerous gamble, but he had no choice. If he didn't capture her, the humans would continue to outmaneuver him, using her brilliance to fuel their rebellion. The plan he devised was simple, yet deadly. He would launch a direct assault on the heart of the human forces, hitting them where they were weakest. The humans had become complacent in their belief that they were always one step ahead of the aliens. Zaltor would strike at the core of their command structure, isolating Reyes and forcing her to reveal herself. On the day of the assault, Zaltor's forces moved quickly and silently, advancing under the cover of darkness. The humans, ever vigilant, had set up patrols, but Zaltor's forces were too numerous, and the aliens had learned to adapt to the humans' unpredictable methods. They infiltrated the human encampment, taking out guards and disabling communication lines before the humans even realized what was happening. Zaltor's heart raced as he approached the command center, where he knew Reyes would be. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the moment when he would finally face the human commander and bring an end to her war. But as his soldiers closed in, something unexpected happened. The humans didn't panic. They didn't flee. Instead, they did something that Zaltor could never have predicted. They fought back with an intensity that seemed beyond human. They didn't retreat into their usual guerrilla tactics, nor did they try to match the aliens in direct combat. Instead, they engaged in something even more dangerous, a full-out, coordinated counterattack. Zaltor watched in disbelief as the humans launched their counteroffensive. Their soldiers, who had once been scattered, now moved as one, their actions synchronized with military precision. They had been waiting for him. They knew exactly where he would strike. Reyes had anticipated his every move, and now her forces were turning the tables. Zaltor's mind raced. What had he missed? How had she known? The answer came to him with chilling clarity. It wasn't just about the battle tactics. It was about trust. Reyes had fostered an unshakable bond with her soldiers. They didn't just follow her commands. They believed in her. They trusted her to lead them, to protect them, and to guide them through the impossible. And because of that trust, they were willing to fight with everything they had. Zaltor's forces found themselves caught in a deadly crossfire. Human soldiers, armed with scavenged alien weaponry, unleashed a barrage of fire that tore through the alien ranks. But it wasn't the sheer firepower that stunned him. It was the resolve in their eyes. These humans weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for something more. They were fighting for each other. It was in that moment, as Zaltor struggled to regroup his soldiers, that he realized the true power of humanity. It wasn't their technology, their numbers, or their weaponry. It was their unity. Their ability to fight, not just for themselves, but for one another. It was something that the aliens had never truly understood. As the battle raged on, Zaltor's forces began to falter. Despite their superior technology, despite their overwhelming numbers, they were being pushed back by the sheer will of the humans. And in the distance, Zaltor caught a glimpse of her, Captain Reyes, standing tall, commanding her forces, unwavering in the face of certain destruction. Zaltor's respect for her grew. He could no longer see her as just a commander to be defeated. She had become the embodiment of everything the humans stood for. And as the battle continued, one thought gnawed at him. Could the aliens ever hope to defeat this kind of enemy? Zaltor stood amidst the chaos of the battlefield, feeling the weight of his past decisions pressing down on him. The humans were relentless, their attacks more sophisticated and calculated with every passing moment. His forces, once a well-oiled machine, were beginning to falter, their cohesion disintegrating under the pressure. It was no longer just a battle of armies. It had become a test of wills, and Zaltor was starting to question if the aliens could ever truly defeat such an indomitable foe. As his troops reeled from the humans' unexpected counteroffensive, Zaltor had a rare moment of reflection. He had spent his entire life commanding armies, perfecting strategies and conquering worlds. Yet here he was, facing an adversary who seemed to defy every rule of warfare he had ever known. He had been trained to anticipate every move, to outmaneuver his enemies at all costs. But the humans were different. They didn't follow the expected paths. They created their own. Zaltor's thoughts were interrupted by the sight of Captain Reyes once again. She had emerged from the thick of the battle, leading her forces with a kind of grace and authority that sent chills down the alien general's spine. He had seen her before, of course. He had watched her through his intel, analyze her every move, but nothing could compare to seeing her in action. There was something mesmerizing about the way she moved, how she guided her soldiers as if they were extensions of her own will. She didn't just command with her words, she commanded with her presence. Zaltor had always believed that leadership came from power, from the ability to crush your enemies and force them to obey. But Reyes, it seemed, led with something far more powerful: trust. Her soldiers fought with a loyalty that was almost unnatural, and they followed her commands without hesitation, even in the face of overwhelming odds. It was clear now that she wasn't just a commander. She was a symbol of something larger, something that transcended mere military strategy. And that was what made her so dangerous. Zaltor realized that he couldn't defeat her by traditional means. He couldn't simply overpower her forces or corner her into submission. The humans had shown him that they were adaptable, that they could think their way out of any situation, no matter how dire. So if brute force wouldn't work, he would have to try something else. He would have to break the humans' resolve in a different way. He began to orchestrate a new plan, one that would strike at the heart of their unity. It wasn't enough to defeat the soldiers. He had to shatter the bond that tied them together, the unspoken connection that made them more than just an army. It wasn't about killing the humans. It was about making them question everything they believed in. If he could fracture their morale, he knew he could turn the tide of the war. The first step of his plan was subtle. He began to isolate key human leaders, cutting off their communication and sowing confusion within their ranks. He spread misinformation, hoping to turn their soldiers against one another, to weaken the trust they had in their command structure. He knew that without that trust, the humans would fall apart. They had no natural hierarchy like the other species Zaltor had encountered. The humans were bound together not by force, but by a shared belief in their cause. If he could weaken that belief, he could break them. For days, Zaltor's forces carried out covert strikes, slipping behind enemy lines and spreading doubt. At first, the humans seemed unaffected, continuing to fight with the same determination as ever. But as the days wore on, Zaltor began to notice cracks. Small at first, like whispers in the dark, But they were there. The humans were starting to question the direction of the war. Were their sacrifices worth it? Was victory even possible? As Exaltor watched the human forces retreat into their strongholds to regroup, he felt a strange satisfaction. He was getting closer to his goal. But then something unexpected happened. In the midst of the confusion, Captain Rise made an appearance on the front lines. She wasn't hiding away in a command center, issuing orders from a distance. No, she was right there, in the thick of it all, rallying her troops, reassuring them with calm words and steely resolve. It was then that Exaltor realized something he had failed to grasp before. Rise wasn't just a commander. She was the embodiment of the human spirit. She wasn't leading through fear or control. She was leading through connection. The more he saw of her, the more he understood why the humans were so unwilling to surrender. It wasn't because they had superior technology or more advanced weapons. It was because they believed in each other. They believed in the idea of standing together, fighting together, and pushing forward no matter the cost. Exaltor's heart sank as he watched her. Despite all of his tactics, all of his carefully laid plans to break the human spirit, Rise remained a constant source of strength for her people. And no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't take that away from her. It was as though every move he made to weaken them only made them stronger. But he couldn't stop now. He couldn't afford to back down, not after everything he had invested in this war. The stakes were too high. His people depended on him to win, to bring the war to a swift end. If he faltered now, everything would be lost. He had to find a way to break Rise, to force her into a position where she had no choice but to surrender. So, he changed tactics once again. He would go after her, not physically, but psychologically. If he could turn her own soldiers against her, if he could make her question her loyalty to her own people, he knew he could bring her down. He began to target the cracks in their morale more directly. He spread rumors among the ranks, whispering about the possibility of betrayal, of leadership failure, and of the futility of their struggle. But it was too late. Despite all of Exaltor's efforts, the humans held strong. They refused to buckle under the pressure, to doubt their cause. And in the end, it wasn't Exaltor who was breaking them. It was himself. The more he pushed, the more desperate he became, the more the humans simply adapted and overcame. As the battle stretched on, Exaltor came to a stark realization. He was no longer fighting just a military campaign. He was fighting an idea. And ideas, as he had learned from the humans, were far more difficult to destroy than any army. Exaltor stood at the precipice of the battlefield, his once mighty army in disarray around him. The ground was littered with the remnants of his soldiers, fallen comrades who had once stood proudly by his side, now reduced to mere casualties in a war he was no longer sure could be won. The humans, relentless and unyielding, had pushed him to the very edge of defeat. Despite every tactic he had devised, every strategy he had perfected over countless campaigns, the humans had shown him something he had never anticipated: an unwavering will to fight, to survive, to overcome. The alien general had spent his entire career studying warfare, dissecting the strategies of his enemies, and learning from every victory and loss. He had conquered worlds, led his people to greatness, and crushed entire civilizations. But this was something entirely different. The humans fought not because they had to, not because they feared death, but because they believed. They fought for something far greater than survival. They fought for their future, for their families, for their ideals. And that, Exaltor realized, was what made them so terrifying. They didn't just fight as soldiers. They fought as humans. The final stages of the battle had been a blur. Exaltor's forces had launched wave after wave of attacks, each one more desperate than the last. But with each failure, the realization hit harder. The humans were not only defending their land, they were fighting for their very existence. And no matter how many soldiers Exaltor sent into the fray, no matter how many strategic advantages his army held, they could not overcome the sheer force of the human spirit. As the day wore on and the sun began to dip below the horizon, Zaltor finally gave the order for a retreat. His troops, battered and broken, had nothing left to give. They had fought valiantly, but in the end, they were no match for the unrelenting tide of human resistance. The sound of their withdrawal echoed across the battlefield, a sad, mournful song of defeat. Zaltor, however, did not retreat with them. He stood there, watching as the humans surged forward, their victory now assured. It was then that he saw her again, Captain Rice, standing at the front of her soldiers, her eyes scanning the horizon as she surveyed the battlefield. She had been there from the very beginning, leading her people with unwavering resolve, inspiring her soldiers with every word, every action. And now, as the smoke cleared and the last remnants of the battle faded away, she was still standing, alive, defiant, unbroken. Zaltor's heart sank as he watched her. She was the embodiment of everything he had tried to destroy: hope, unity, and the power of belief. He had underestimated her from the start, dismissing her as just another human commander to be crushed beneath the might of his empire. But she had proven him wrong, just as humanity had proven him wrong. Time and time again, she had outsmarted him, outlasted him, and outwilled him. And now, as he stood there in the ruins of his own ambition, Zaltor realized that it wasn't just his forces that had been defeated, it was his very understanding of what war truly meant. For the first time in his long and storied career, Zaltor felt a deep, gnawing sense of admiration for his enemies. He had fought countless battles, faced species far more advanced than humanity, but none had ever tested him like this. None had ever made him question his beliefs, his strategies, and the very nature of his existence. The humans had done what no other species had ever managed to do. They had forced him to confront his own limitations, his own arrogance, and his own understanding of what true strength was. As the retreating alien forces melted into the distance, Zaltor's gaze remained fixed on Captain Rice. There was no joy in her victory, no sense of triumph or vindication. Instead, she looked exhausted, worn down by the endless fighting, the loss, and the unrelenting pressure of leadership. But there was something else in her eyes, something that Zaltor could not quite grasp, something that eluded him, even as he stood there watching her from afar. It was then that the full weight of the situation hit him. Rice and her people had not won because they were superior in technology or tactics. They had won because they had something the aliens could never hope to match: unity, resilience, and an unshakable belief in their own humanity. They had faced impossible odds and come through it together, bound not by their weapons or their power, but by the strength of their convictions. And as Zaltor began to make his way back to his command ship, the finality of defeat sinking in, he understood something profound. The war was over, and humanity had won. But the true cost of that victory was not in the lives lost or the resources spent. It was in the realization that the aliens had been defeated by something they could never understand or replicate. They had been defeated by the human spirit. As the last remnants of the battle faded into the past, Zaltor's mind turned to the future. There was no denying the humans' victory now. They had proven themselves not just worthy adversaries, but something far more formidable, something that could not be defeated by force alone. The question that now burned in his mind was not how to conquer humanity, but how to understand them. How could the alien empire ever hope to overcome such a force, such a people? And for the first time in his life, Zaltor was forced to confront a truth he had never anticipated. Perhaps, in this war, it wasn't the humans who needed to change. Perhaps it was the aliens who had to evolve.